Hey, it's Victoria Price. Thanks for listening to Hide and Seek, my podcast about hiding and seeking and sharing this journey about hiding and seeking. And this week's episode is the color purple. This weekend, here in the United States, we are celebrating Independence Day. The red, white, and blue will be flying high, and people will be celebrating with parades and barbecues and fireworks. One nation under God. That's what we're supposed to be celebrating. When in fact, our country often feels as divided as the flags, the blues and their stars versus the reds and their stripes. A few months ago, I was chatting with my neighbors, Kathy and Tom, who were extolling how wonderful our neighborhood is and what a community we have. And Tom said, during the election, we had a big sign up for Biden, and our neighbors had a big sign up for Trump. And someone walked by and said, "Love your sign, too bad about your neighbors." And we said, "We love our neighbors. They're great people." To which Kathy added, "Hey, what's wrong with the color purple?" I've thought about that a lot since then. Because actually, being in a purple state during the pandemic has been one of my greatest learning experiences. One of the things that's really helped me to see is how often I judge other people, even when I don't want to. I thought it was very easy to tell the Reds from the Blues here last year because the Blues wore masks and the Reds didn't, or so I thought. Until I realized that I was walking 5 to 10 miles a day during the pandemic and I never wore a mask. I didn't wear a mask because I never got within 10 feet of another human being and there weren't very many human beings around, and until I found Groff Lance masks. And yes, that's an unsolicited product plug for the hands down best masks out there, because I couldn't breathe wearing masks or see out of my glasses when I walked until Groff Lance. Fantastic masks. And that's not even product placement. So, back to the actual podcast. Did people think I was anti-community and didn't care about others because I wasn't wearing a mask? I actually never thought about that. I just didn't wear a mask. But I sure thought about everyone else's motivations not to wear a mask and wrote whole stories about them in my head. Even, as I kept saying to anyone who would listen, the whole point of this pandemic is for us to find a way to come together. Why aren't we thinking like one planet instead of different countries or different political parties? Why can't we see the world as one? Ha! See, that's the thing about judgment. It's a sneaky devil. It gets us to focus on the faults of others so that we have a perfect excuse to ignore our own stuff. I remember my 8th grade English teacher, Mrs. Jordan, telling us about this when we were reading some literary classic, and there was a character who could see everyone's faults but their own. So she brought up this verse in the Bible but explained it in her own words. Why is it so much easier to complain about the speck in someone else's eye when you have a whole telephone pole sticking out of your own? Well, it's because we're so used to that telephone pole that we don't even notice it anymore. And that's why we have to be so vigilant about judgment. If we're judging someone else, there's a pretty good chance we're not seeing that the issue is always inside us. So how do we learn how to stop falling into the trap of judging others, which then obscures what we really need to see? We all know the little pithy turns of phrase, judge not that ye be not judged, or love thy neighbor as thyself, but watch someone throw a cigarette butt out a car window and a whole monologue about littering and destroying the planet ensues. And yet, how many times have I stopped to clean up this planet myself? Whenever I'm with my friend Shawnetta, he comes back from one of our walks with a whole bag of trash, and all I can think is, yuck. And I consider myself an environmentalist. I might not litter, but I will walk right past something that needs to be picked up that actually will make the planet cleaner. So the fact of the matter is, we need a workaround. And something about what's wrong with the color purple gave me my clue. Judgment is such a setup. It's us versus them, me versus you. Judgment is inherently divisive. It's about right and wrong, except no one can ever really be right or wrong because humanly we're all going to screw up. So what we are all trying to do is to find the nearest right for each solution. And then what we need to do is let ourselves be guided by the principle of love. So what do I mean by the principle of love? Well, first off, I mean love with the big L, the infinite love that is inside each of us, which, if we listen, will always tell us when we're off course and guide us back to center. And a principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. So I mean taking love with the big L, infinite love, as our foundational belief for all our thoughts and actions. And what does this do? Well, it immediately points out the flaws of the us versus them reasoning, because if we're all rooted and grounded in love, if we all want the same thing, to love and to be loved, and for those that we love to love and be loved, then how can there ever be something inherently wrong in another person? But there is something wrong with our thought system that sees us versus them, that sees separation, rather than oneness. And we all know that deep down, but how do we change it? Well, I think one way to get there is to shift our focus. In Alice Walker's wonderful novel, The Color Purple, the character Shug says to Celie, a woman who has been in misery pretty much her whole life up to that point, I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it. That sentence was a game changer in Celie's life. She had been so miserable and unhappy, justifiably so, due to the abuse she had endured, that she had never seen the beauty in the world. Then a beautiful human being came in and showed her all the beauty around her, and everything shifted. In the book, The Color Purple represents all the beauty and love that is all around us, even when all we seem to see is divisiveness and darkness and fear and hatred. The love with the big L all around us is what the love with the big L inside each and every one of us recognizes. We all are rooted and grounded in love. But we forget. And yet, look at every disheartening news story. There's always an accompanying story, though it may not be the one that gets the headlines, of the kindness or service or love that has emerged. Well, that's the key to getting out of judgment. It's learning to take whatever is challenging us and see it in a new way. This week, I've had that opportunity over and over again as a bombardment of challenges arose, and each time I felt tempted to feel disheartened or to get afraid or to judge or to doubt. I had to reground myself in the principle of infinite love. Because when we make love with the big L our principle of all thought and action, then we stop seeing red, white, and blue, separate colors, and we realize that the true beauty of life is the color purple, the way that love brings us all together by allowing us to see one another as expressions of love instead of differing sociopolitical or sexual or racial statuses, the uniqueness and the blending, the ways in which each of us is changed by every interaction we have. But it requires a commitment. When the thought comes in that would divide you in thought from another person or group or idea, you have to look beyond any seeming justification for that thought and choose to see the color purple instead. This week, I was told essentially that someone hates me. I was even told all the reasons why. And I had to pray really deeply about this and look for any ways in which any of my actions would justify that person's thoughts and feelings about me, because I don't want to be someone anyone would hate. But that wasn't enough. I also had to release my fear, any self-justification, and then I had to recognize that even in the opposite of what I would want to have someone think about me, love is right there. because I saw how horrible it must feel to think what that person thinks about me, to believe that someone else would want anything but the best for them. And that helped me see that I'd actually been feeling the same way. That we both have felt excluded and judged and disliked and unsupported. We both spent time feeling the same things and then justifying them, and that hadn't felt good to either of us. I can't do anything about what another person might think, but the only solution for me was to get out of that circular thinking that was going exactly nowhere and apply that principle of infinite love, to see that even in this seeming divide between us is the color purple, is the allness of love, and that love will always adjust the balance for love. Neither of us has to stay stuck in a situation that feels terrible. Once we remember that we're here to see the beauty and feel the joy and the gratitude of and for the color purple, for all the love that exists in each of us and between each of us, and that can never be removed or destroyed, because love always takes each of us all the way home. Right where something else seems to be, love is. When I'm afraid, it's often fear masquerading as love, but love hasn't gone anywhere. Both of us wanted to do the right thing, but our fears and egos and old stories got in the way of what we wanted. And so we ended up doing the opposite of what we really wanted. But when we look for the love that's always there, which was there in the care and concern for the work we're doing, then we're not walking by the color purple in the field anymore. We're present to love. A dear friend was recently really vulnerable with me about not having enough money and how afraid she feels. Oh my gosh, how often have I been there and had to learn that right when we're afraid of not having enough, we're so focused on lack and how to survive that lack that we're walking by the color purple, the source and supply that is always present. Whenever I've struggled with fear that feels so real that it seems to have a visceral manifestation, I've had to remember fear is a habit and all habits can be broken. And the way that we break the habit of fear is to remember that all of us, everything is rooted and grounded in infinite love. That's why finding the joy and gratitude, the color purple, is so essential. So how do we see the color purple? How do we look for the color purple? Well, for me, joy and gratitude have to become a daily practice. Joy for the opportunity to see love right where we're so sure it's not. Gratitude for all the ways we know love is right here, right now, and always has been. Presence and practice. And what does this have to do with hiding? Well, sometimes it's not a case of us hiding. Sometimes the thing we need gets hidden by habitual behavior, the ego, human will. Celie had probably walked through fields filled with purple, seen night skies light up purple, and never noticed because she was so afraid and downtrodden. But love comes into her life in the form of Shug, and everything shifts. When we show up to love through the practices of presence and joy and gratitude, everything shifts. And we realize that it's old habits of thought, whether ours or our parents or the world's, that hide the omnipresence of infinite love. Infinite love always present in each of us. And here's the really good news. Nothing true can ever remain hidden. The truth is love, and love is the truth. By looking for the color purple every day, we break the habit of fear and see through the eyes of love. So that's not only what I've been thinking about this week, it's what I'm endeavoring to practice. On this Independence Day weekend, as I head downtown to be with people who are definitely going to be a mix of reds and blues, I am going to be seeing all the ways they embody the color purple. The love that brings us all together in the enjoyment of life, of freedom, of hope, of community, of joy. So I hope you do the same, because what could be more liberating than to release all those old habits of fear and remember the presence of love that really does heal us all. Thank you for listening to Hide and Seek, a podcast about hiding and seeking and sharing. Have a great week, everyone.